Danny wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag for the third time that morning. The stain wasn't coming out anyway, but it was a habit. After 3 years working at Peterson's auto shop, his hands always carried traces of engine oil under his fingernails, no matter how hard he scrubbed. "Hey, Danny, you got a minute?" Kevin called out from across the garage. Kevin had started working there just 6 months after Danny, but somehow he always seemed to have more money, nicer clothes, and now apparently a fancy engagement party to plan. Danny looked up from the Honda Civic he was working on. The transmission was giving him trouble and Mrs. Chen needed her car back by 5. "Yeah, what's up?" Kevin walked over grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "So you know Ashley and I are getting engaged next weekend, right?" Danny nodded. He'd heard about it plenty. Kevin talked about Ashley constantly, how beautiful she was, how her family had money, how they were planning this amazing life together. It wasn't that Danny was jealous exactly, but sometimes it stung a little. Here he was, 26 years old, still living in a tiny apartment above the Chinese restaurant on 5th Street, while Kevin seemed to have it all figured out. "Well, we're having this engagement party at the Riverside Country Club," Kevin continued, his excitement obvious. "It's going to be huge. Ashley's family knows everyone in town. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, the whole 9 yards. Danny turned back to the transmission. "Sounds nice, man. I'm sure you'll have a great time." "That's the thing," Kevin said, lowering his voice. "I want you to come." Danny's wrench slipped and he barely avoided scraping his knuckles on the metal. "Me, at the country club?" "Yeah, why not? You're like family to me, Danny. We work together every day. You've had my back more times than I can count." Kevin leaned against the car. "Remember when I accidentally drained the oil on that BMW without checking the filter? You helped me fix it before Peterson found out. I could have lost my job, that was true." Danny had spent his lunch break helping Kevin clean up that mess. It wasn't the first time either. Kevin was good with customers. He could talk to anyone, make them feel comfortable, convince them to trust the shop with their expensive cars. But when it came to the actual work, Danny often found himself quietly fixing Kevin's mistakes. "I don't know, Kevin. That's not really my crowd." "Come on," Kevin insisted. "It'll be fun. Good food, open bar, and Ashley's been asking about you. She wants to meet the guy who keeps me out of trouble." Danny doubted that was true, but Kevin seemed sincere. Still, the thought of showing up at some fancy country club made his stomach turn. He'd driven past the Riverside Country Club plenty of times. It was the kind of place where people wore suits that cost more than Danny made in a month. "I wouldn't even know what to wear," Danny said, hoping Kevin would take the hint. "Just throw on a nice shirt and tie. It's not that formal." Kevin patted Danny on the shoulder. "Look, I know it might feel weird at first, but these are good people. Ashley's dad is a lawyer. Her mom runs some charity thing. They're not stuck up or anything." Danny wanted to believe that, but he'd grown up in this town. He knew how things worked. There were the people who lived in the big houses on the hill, and then there were people like him, the ones who fixed their cars, cleaned their houses, and served their food. Those lines didn't usually get crossed, especially not at fancy parties. But Kevin was looking at him with such hope, such genuine friendship, that Danny found himself wavering. When was the last time someone had invited him to anything? His social life mostly consisted of grabbing a beer with his neighbor Tommy, or watching TV alone in his apartment. "I really can't afford anything fancy," Danny said quietly. "It's not about the money, man. Just come as you are." "Well, maybe shower first." Kevin laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Danny thought about his checking account. After rent, utilities, and groceries, he usually had about $50 left over each month. That was supposed to go toward savings, but savings for what? He'd been putting away $20 or $30 here and there for 3 years, and he still had less than $1,000 to his name. Maybe Kevin was right. Maybe these people weren't as stuck up as he imagined, and maybe, just maybe, this could be a chance to expand his world a little. He was tired of feeling like he was stuck in the same routine. Work, home, sleep, repeat. "When is it?" Danny asked. "Next Saturday, 7 o'clock. Danny nodded slowly. "Okay, yeah, I'll come." Kevin's face lit up. "Seriously? That's awesome. You're going to love it, I promise." The rest of the week, Danny found himself thinking about the party more than he wanted to admit. He walked through the mall after work on Wednesday, looking at shirts and ties. Everything seemed so expensive. A decent shirt was $60. A tie was $30. He finally found a white button-down at a discount store for $25 and a simple blue tie for $15. When Saturday came, Danny spent an hour getting ready. He showered twice, making sure every trace of engine oil was gone. He combed his hair carefully and even used some of the cologne his sister had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. Looking in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. The shirt fit well enough and the tie looked decent. He practiced introducing himself a few times, trying to sound confident. "Hi, I'm Danny. I work with Kevin at the auto shop." No, that sounded too apologetic. "Hi, I'm Danny. Kevin and I work together." Better. His car was another problem. Danny drove a 15-year-old Toyota that he'd bought with a blown head gasket and rebuilt himself. It ran fine, but it definitely didn't look like something that belonged in the parking lot of a country club. He thought about asking his neighbor if he could borrow his car, but that felt too desperate. The drive to the country club took 20 minutes, and with every mile, Danny's nervousness grew. By the time he pulled into the circular driveway, his palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. The building was even more impressive up close. Tall white columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and a valet who looked confused when Danny got out of his old Toyota. Danny almost turned around right then, but he'd already committed. Kevin was counting on him. He walked through the front doors, clutching the small gift he'd wrapped himself, a nice picture frame he'd found at the drugstore. The inside of the club took his breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and everything seemed to sparkle under the warm light. Danny took a deep breath and walked toward the sound of laughter and conversation, hoping he'd made the right choice. The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filled the air as Danny stepped into the main room. Everyone looked like they belonged in a magazine. The men in perfectly tailored suits, the women in elegant dresses that probably cost more than Danny's rent. He tugged at his discount store tie and tried to blend in. "Danny, you made it." Kevin appeared at his side, looking completely at home in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it was custom-made. "Come on, let me introduce you to Ashley." They weaved through the crowd, and Danny couldn't help but notice how people's eyes followed them. Not in a welcoming way, but more like they were trying to figure out who didn't belong. Danny forced a smile and nodded at a few people, but most just looked through him like he was invisible. Ashley was standing near the bar, surrounded by a group of women who all seemed to be talking at once. She was beautiful, Danny had to admit, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a dress that sparkled under the lights. When Kevin approached with Danny, the conversation stopped. "Ashley, honey, this is Danny from work, the one I've been telling you about." Ashley's smile looked practiced, like something she'd rehearsed in the mirror. "Oh, how nice to meet you. Kevin talks about the shop all the time." "Congratulations on your engagement," Danny said, holding out the small wrapped gift. "I brought you something." Ashley took the gift with the tips of her fingers like she was afraid it might be dirty. "How thoughtful. I'll just put this with the others." She handed it off to one of her friends without even looking at it twice. The friend glanced at the drugstore wrapping paper and raised an eyebrow before walking away with it. "Danny's been at Peterson's for 3 years, Kevin said, trying to fill the awkward silence. "He's the best mechanic they've got. Taught me everything I know." "How wonderful," Ashley said, but her attention was already drifting to someone else across the room. "Oh, there's Dr. Morrison. I should go say hello." "Kevin, don't forget we need to talk to Daddy about the wedding venue." She walked away without another word to Danny, leaving him standing there feeling smaller than he had when he'd walked in. "She's just nervous about meeting everyone," Kevin said quickly. "You know how it is." Danny nodded, but he could read people well enough. Ashley hadn't been nervous. She'd been politely dismissive, the way someone might treat a waiter or delivery person. Necessary, but not important. "Let me get you a drink," Kevin said. "What do you want?" "They've got everything. Just a beer if they have it." Kevin flagged down a bartender and ordered. While they waited, a man in an expensive suit approached them. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident smile that came from never having to worry about money. "Kevin, my boy, there you are." The man clapped Kevin on the shoulder like they were old friends. "Your future wife has been looking for you." "Mr. Patterson, this is Danny. We work together at Peterson's auto shop." Mr. Patterson's smile flickered for just a second as he looked Danny up and down. "Ah, yes, the auto shop. That's nice." He turned back to Kevin without shaking Danny's hand. "I was just talking to Judge Richards about that golf tournament next month." "You should join us. That sounds great," Kevin said. "Excellent. Bring your clubs to the house sometime and we'll get you fitted properly. Mr. Patterson glanced at Danny again. Well, I should let you get back to your friend here. The way he said friend made it clear he meant something else entirely. Danny felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he kept quiet. Kevin didn't seem to notice the insult, or if he did, he didn't care enough to say anything. The evening continued like that. Danny tried to join conversations, but people either ignored him or spoke to him like he was a child. When he mentioned he worked on cars, they nodded politely and quickly changed the subject. When someone asked what kind of car he drove and he mentioned his old Toyota, the person actually laughed. "Oh, that's precious," the woman said. "I remember my first car. We all have to start somewhere, don't we?" Danny was 26 years old. Not 16, but he didn't bother correcting her. The worst part was watching Kevin. As the night went on, Kevin seemed to transform into someone Danny barely recognized. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny, agreed with opinions he'd never expressed before, and used words Danny had never heard him say. It was like Kevin was putting on an act, playing a role. Around 9 o'clock, Danny was standing near the appetizer table, trying to figure out what half the food was, when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "I just don't understand why Kevin invited his coworker," a woman was saying. "It's so awkward." "Ashley's mortified," another woman replied. "She said he showed up in a shirt from Walmart or something." "Can you imagine?" Danny looked down at his shirt. It wasn't from Walmart, but it might as well have been. He felt like everyone in the room could see the price tag. "And did you see the gift he brought?" the first woman continued. Poor Ashley didn't know what to do with it. "Someone should have a talk with Kevin about appropriate guest lists," a man's voice added. "This is supposed to be a celebration, not a charity event." Danny's hands shook as he reached for a napkin. They were talking about him like he was some kind of problem to be solved, some embarrassment that needed to be managed. He wanted to walk over and defend himself, but what would he say? That he belonged here? That he was just as good as them? The evidence suggested otherwise. He was about to leave when he heard Kevin's voice from across the room. Danny turned and saw Kevin talking to Mr. Patterson and a few other men near the bar. They were speaking quietly, but the room had gotten louder, so Danny moved closer to hear what they were saying. "I know it was awkward," Kevin was saying. "I felt bad for the guy, you know. He doesn't get out much." "That's very charitable of you," Mr. Patterson said, but Ashley was quite upset. "She worked so hard planning this evening." I know. It was a mistake to invite him. I just didn't want to hurt his feelings." Danny felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Kevin, his friend Kevin, who had begged him to come, who had called him family, was calling him a mistake. Not just to anyone, but to Ashley's father and his new circle of friends. "Well, next time you'll know better," one of the other men said. "These things require a certain discretion about the guest list." "Absolutely," Kevin agreed. "I'm still learning how all this works." They all laughed, and Danny felt something inside him break. He'd spent 3 years working alongside Kevin, helping him, covering for his mistakes, treating him like a brother. And this was how Kevin really saw him, as an embarrassment, a mistake, someone to be managed and eventually discarded. Danny set down his untouched beer and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. No one even noticed he was leaving. He pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the cool night air, feeling like he could finally breathe again. But as he walked to his car, Danny realized something had changed. The humiliation was still there, burning in his chest, but underneath it was something else, something harder and colder. He'd learned something important tonight about people, about friendship, and about how the world really worked. As he drove away from the country club, Danny made a decision. He was done being invisible, done being the mistake people regretted inviting. It was time to show Kevin and everyone else exactly who they were dealing with. Danny sat in his apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every humiliating moment from the party. It was past midnight, but sleep seemed impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Kevin's voice saying, it was a mistake to invite him, and saw the disgusted looks on those people's faces. He'd always known he wasn't rich like them, but tonight had made him feel like he was somehow less than human. Like his 3 years of hard work, his honesty, his friendship meant nothing because he didn't have the right clothes or the right car or the right background. At 2 a.m, Danny gave up on sleep. He threw on his work clothes and drove to Peterson's auto shop. Sometimes when his mind was racing, the only thing that helped was working with his hands. The familiar smell of motor oil and the quiet of the garage usually calmed him down. He used his key to get in and flipped on the lights. The shop looked different at night, bigger somehow with shadows stretching across the floor. Danny walked to his workbench and started organizing his tools, trying to push the evening out of his mind. That's when he noticed Kevin's desk. Kevin always kept his workspace messy, but tonight there were papers scattered everywhere, like he'd left in a hurry. Danny wouldn't normally look through someone else's stuff, but a folder had fallen open, and he could see invoices spilling out. At first, he was just going to close the folder and put it back. But something caught his eye. It was an invoice for brake pads, expensive ones, but the customer name looked familiar. Mrs. Rodriguez, the lady who brought in her Honda last month. Danny remembered that job clearly because Kevin had handled it while Danny was working on another car. Mrs. Rodriguez had only needed an oil change, nothing major. But according to this invoice, Kevin had charged her for 4 new brake pads at $80 each, plus labor. Danny's stomach dropped. Mrs. Rodriguez was a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. She'd specifically asked for the cheapest service possible. There was no way Kevin had done brake work on her car. With shaking hands, Danny opened the folder completely. Inside were dozens of invoices, all in Kevin's handwriting. As he looked through them, a sick feeling grew in his chest. Customer after customer had been charged for work that was never done, parts that were never installed, services that never happened. Here was Mr. Chen, charged $300 for a transmission flush on his truck. Danny had worked on that truck himself. It only needed new spark plugs. There was Mrs. Johnson, billed for 4 new tires when Kevin had only replaced 2. And Mr. Williams, who'd been charged for a complete brake replacement when all he'd needed was new brake fluid. But it got worse. Danny found a notebook filled with Kevin's handwriting, tracking inventory that had gone missing. Expensive air filters, spark plugs, oil filters, brake rotors, all marked as sold but with no corresponding customer records. Kevin had been stealing parts and selling them somewhere else. Danny's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. He'd trusted Kevin. More than that, he'd covered for Kevin's mistakes dozens of times, thinking his friend was just careless or learning on the job. Now he realized Kevin hadn't been making mistakes at all. He'd been stealing. In the back of the notebook, Danny found something that made his blood run cold. It was a plan, written in Kevin's handwriting, outlining how to frame Danny for the missing inventory. Kevin had been keeping track of every time Danny had worked alone in the shop, every time he'd had access to the parts room, every opportunity Kevin could use to make it look like Danny was the thief. The plan was detailed and cruel. Kevin had even written down things like, Danny always works late, perfect opportunity, and Danny's desperate for money, good motive. There were notes about how Kevin could plant evidence in Danny's toolbox, how he could make it look like Danny had been skimming cash from the register. Danny sat down hard in Kevin's chair, feeling sick. All this time, while he'd been treating Kevin like a brother, Kevin had been setting him up to take the fall for his crimes. If Peterson ever discovered the missing money and parts, Danny would have been the obvious suspect. A poor guy who needed money, who had access to everything, who worked alone at night. He kept looking through the papers, and the scope of Kevin's theft became clear. Over the past year, Kevin had stolen nearly $15,000 worth of parts and overcharged customers for at least $20,000 in fake services. And according to some text messages Danny found printed out, Kevin and Ashley had been using that money to pay for their engagement ring, their wedding plans, and the down payment on a house. The texts between Kevin and Ashley were the worst part. Ashley complained about needing more money for the wedding flowers, and Kevin promised to take care of it by charging a few more customers for unnecessary work. Ashley wanted a bigger diamond ring, so Kevin sold more stolen parts. They talked about Danny like he was a useful tool, someone who could cover for Kevin's absences while Kevin ran his scams. In one text, Ashley had written, "What if that mechanic guy figures it out?" Kevin had replied, "Don't worry about Danny. He's too trusting and too stupid to catch on. And if he does, I've got it all set up to look like he's the one stealing. Peterson will fire him and we'll be in the clear." Danny stared at that message for a long time. Too trusting and too stupid. That's how his friend really saw him. Not just tonight at the party, but every day they'd worked together. Kevin had been laughing at him behind his back while planning to destroy his life, but there was more. Danny found bank deposit slips showing that Kevin had been depositing cash from his scams into a secret account. He found receipts for expensive dinners, clothes, and jewelry, all paid for with stolen money. He even found a lease agreement for the fancy apartment Kevin and Ashley were planning to move into after their wedding. Everything Kevin had, his nice clothes, his confidence at the party, his ability to fit in with Ashley's wealthy family, it was all built on lies and theft. While Danny had been struggling to pay rent on his honest salary, Kevin had been living like a king on stolen money. The worst part was realizing how long this had been going on. Some of the invoices were dated from Kevin's first month at the shop. He'd been planning this from the beginning, probably looking for someone like Danny, honest, hardworking, and trusting, who could provide cover for his activities. Danny thought about all the times Kevin had asked him to work late, to handle certain customers, to cover for him when he needed to leave early. It hadn't been friendship. It had been manipulation. Kevin had been using Danny's work ethic and reliability to create opportunities for theft. As the sun started to rise, Danny was still sitting in the shop, surrounded by evidence of his best friend's betrayal. His phone was full of pictures and his mind was racing with the implications of what he'd discovered. Kevin wasn't just a thief. He was smart about it, careful about it, and completely ruthless. He'd been willing to destroy Danny's life to protect his own secret. If Peterson had discovered the thefts, Danny would have lost his job, his reputation, and possibly faced criminal charges. But now Danny knew the truth. And for the first time since leaving the party, he smiled. Kevin had made one crucial mistake. In all his careful planning, he'd underestimated the too trusting and too stupid mechanic who'd been covering for him all along. Danny might not have fancy clothes or a rich family, but he had something Kevin didn't, integrity and the truth on his side. It was time to show Kevin and Ashley and everyone at that party exactly what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. Danny spent the entire weekend thinking about what he'd discovered. Part of him wanted to march straight to Peterson on Monday morning and dump all the evidence on his desk. But that felt too simple, too quick. Kevin had been planning this for over a year, carefully setting Danny up to take the fall. If Danny was going to do this right, he needed to be just as careful. Monday morning, Danny arrived at work early and acted completely normal. When Kevin walked in 20 minutes late, Danny greeted him with the same friendly smile he always had. "Hey man, how are you feeling after Saturday night?" Danny asked, organizing his tools. Kevin grinned and rubbed his forehead. "Still recovering." That open bar was dangerous. "Thanks again for coming, by the way. It meant a lot to Ashley and me." The lie came so easily to Kevin that Danny almost believed him for a second. But he remembered every word from that conversation with Mr. Patterson. Kevin was a better actor than Danny had ever realized. No problem. "It was fun meeting everyone," Danny said, testing how far Kevin would go with the deception. "Yeah, they all loved you. Ashley's still talking about how nice you were." Danny nodded and went back to his work, amazed at how naturally Kevin could lie. Over the next few days, Danny watched Kevin more carefully. He noticed things he'd missed before. How Kevin always volunteered to handle certain customers, especially older ones, or people who seemed less likely to question a bill. How Kevin always worked on cars when Danny was busy with something else. How Kevin made sure to be the one who wrote up most of the invoices. But Danny didn't confront him. Instead, he started his own investigation. Every night after work, Danny returned to the shop and carefully photographed more evidence. He made copies of invoices, took pictures of Kevin's notebook, and documented every fake charge he could find. He was methodical about it, organizing everything by date and customer. But Danny knew he needed more than just Kevin's paperwork. He needed to talk to the customers who'd been cheated. Starting with Mrs. Rodriguez, Danny began making phone calls. He was careful about how he approached it, telling each customer that the shop was doing a quality check on recent services. "Hi, Mrs. Rodriguez. This is Danny from Peterson's Auto Shop. I'm calling to follow up on the brake work we did on your Honda last month. How have the brakes been feeling?" There was confusion in her voice. "Brake work? I thought you just changed my oil." "Let me check the invoice again," Danny said, pretending to shuffle papers. "It shows here that we replaced all 4 brake pads." "You weren't having any problems with the brakes before you brought it in?" "No, no problems at all. And I specifically asked for just an oil change because that's all I could afford. Are you sure you have the right car? Danny's heart sank even though he'd expected this answer. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez, there must be some kind of mistake in our records. Let me look into this and call you back. Wait, she said, and Danny could hear worry in her voice. I was charged $320. I thought that seemed high for an oil change, but the young man, Kevin, I think, said my car needed extra work. Are you telling me I was overcharged? Danny closed his eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez worked 2 jobs to support her kids. $300 was probably a huge amount for her. I'm going to look into this personally, Mrs. Rodriguez. If there was an error, we'll make it right. The conversation with Mr. Chen was even worse. He'd been charged for a transmission flush that never happened, costing him $400. When Danny called, Mr. Chen mentioned that he'd been worried about affording his medication that month because of the unexpected car repair bill. One by one, Danny called 15 customers. Every single one confirmed what he already knew. They'd been charged for work that was never done. The total amount stolen was even higher than Danny had calculated. Some customers had been cheated multiple times over several months. The hardest call was to Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who'd been charged for 4 new tires when Kevin had only installed 2. She'd paid with her Social Security money and had been eating cheaper food for weeks to make up for the unexpected expense. I trusted that young man, she said sadly. He seemed so honest, so concerned about my safety. He said the tires were dangerous and I could have an accident. I was scared, so I agreed to pay for new ones. Danny felt sick. Kevin hadn't just stolen money. He'd scared an old woman into paying for services she didn't need. As Danny gathered more evidence, he also started learning about Kevin and Ashley's spending. He discovered they'd put a deposit on a house that cost 3 times what either of them could afford on their legitimate salaries. Ashley had been posting pictures on social media of expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and fancy dinners, all paid for with stolen money. The more Danny learned, the angrier he got. While he'd been eating cheap ramen and worrying about paying rent, Kevin and Ashley had been living like celebrities on money stolen from hardworking people like Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Chen. But Danny's anger was cold and focused now. He wasn't just thinking about revenge, he was thinking about justice. 2 weeks after the party, Danny had built a complete case. He had copies of all the fake invoices, photos of Kevin's planning notebook, records of the stolen inventory, and statements from 15 customers who'd been overcharged. He'd even tracked down where Kevin was selling the stolen parts, a shady dealer across town who bought car parts with no questions asked. Danny also discovered something that made Kevin's plan even more sinister. Kevin had been slowly introducing mistakes into Danny's work records, making it look like Danny had been the one handling many of the customers who'd been overcharged. If Peterson had discovered the theft, Danny would have looked guilty. But Kevin had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd kept records of everything, probably to make sure he didn't get caught in his own lies. Those same records now provided perfect evidence of his guilt. Danny's next step was the hardest one. He needed to decide how to expose Kevin. He could simply turn everything over to Peterson and let the police handle it. But that felt too private, too quiet. After the humiliation at the party, after discovering how Kevin and Ashley really felt about him, Danny wanted something more public. That's when he found out about the wedding. Kevin had been bragging about it all week. The ceremony was going to be at the same country club where the engagement party had been held. All the same people would be there: Mr. Patterson, Ashley's family, everyone who'd looked down on Danny that night. Danny spent hours thinking about timing. If he exposed Kevin before the wedding, Kevin might run or hide the evidence. But if he waited until after, some of the impact would be lost. Then Danny realized there was a perfect middle ground. He started making phone calls to the customers who'd been cheated, explaining what had really happened and offering full refunds from his own savings. Most were grateful, but a few were angry enough to want justice. "What are you going to do about it?" Mr. Chen asked. "I'm working on that," Danny said, "but I need to ask you a favor. Are you free this Saturday afternoon?" Danny also reached out to someone else, a detective he'd met when his apartment had been broken into the year before. Detective Williams remembered Danny as honest and helpful, and when Danny explained what he'd discovered, the detective was very interested. "This is a serious case," Detective Williams said, looking through Danny's evidence. Wire fraud, theft, conspiracy. We're talking about felony charges. What happens next? Danny asked. We'll need to investigate officially, but with evidence like this, it's pretty straightforward. When were you planning to report this? Danny smiled for the first time in weeks. Saturday afternoon, at the Riverside Country Club. Everything was falling into place. Kevin and Ashley thought they were so smart, so much better than the stupid mechanic who'd been covering for them all along. They'd used stolen money to build their perfect life and their perfect wedding. But Danny had learned something important over the past 2 weeks. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't getting mad, it was getting even. And sometimes the person everyone underestimated turned out to be the most dangerous one in the room. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday morning, Danny woke up feeling calm for the first time in weeks. Today was the day. He put on his best clothes, not the cheap shirt from the engagement party, but a decent outfit he'd borrowed from his neighbor. He wasn't trying to fit in anymore. He was there for business. The wedding was scheduled for 3 o'clock at the Riverside Country Club. Danny arrived at 2:30, but he wasn't alone. Detective Williams was with him, along with 2 other officers in plain clothes. Several of Kevin's victims had also come, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chen, Mrs. Johnson, and a few others who wanted to see justice done. Danny walked through the same doors where he'd been humiliated 3 weeks earlier, but everything felt different now. He wasn't the scared, nervous guy in the cheap tie anymore. He was someone with a purpose. The wedding setup was beautiful. White flowers everywhere, elegant decorations, and the same crowd of wealthy people who'd treated Danny like he was invisible. They were all there, Mr. Patterson, Ashley's mother, all the doctors and lawyers who'd looked down their noses at the poor mechanic. Danny spotted Kevin at the front of the room, adjusting his expensive tuxedo and laughing with his groomsmen. Ashley was probably getting ready somewhere upstairs, putting on the wedding dress they'd bought with stolen money. The ceremony started right on time. Danny watched from the back as Kevin and Ashley exchanged vows about honesty, trust, and building a life together. The irony wasn't lost on him. Every word they spoke was built on lies. When the minister asked if anyone had objections to the marriage, Danny stood up. "I do," he said loudly. The room went completely silent. Kevin's face went white when he saw Danny standing there. Ashley looked confused and angry. "Excuse me," the minister said, "but this is a private ceremony." "I know," Danny said, walking down the aisle. "But I have some information about the groom that I think everyone should hear before they make this commitment official." "Danny, what are you doing?" Kevin called out, trying to sound friendly, but Danny could hear the panic in his voice. "I'm doing what I should have done weeks ago," Danny replied. He reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. "My name is Danny Chen, and I work with Kevin at Peterson's auto shop. 3 weeks ago, many of you made it very clear that you thought I was beneath you. You treated me like I was some kind of charity case, someone who didn't belong in your world." Mr. Patterson stood up. "Young man, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever grievance you think you have." "Actually, sir, this is exactly the right time and place," Danny said. "Because this wedding is being paid for with stolen money, and I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about who they're celebrating." The room erupted in whispers. Ashley grabbed Kevin's arm. "What is he talking about?" Danny pulled out a folder filled with copies of all the evidence he'd gathered. "For the past year, Kevin has been systematically stealing from our auto shop and defrauding customers. He's stolen over $15,000 in parts and overcharged customers for more than $20,000 in services they never received." "That's ridiculous," Kevin said, but his voice was shaking. "Danny, you're obviously upset about something, but making false accusations at my wedding isn't the answer." "False accusations?" Danny opened the folder and pulled out the first invoice. "Mrs. Rodriguez, could you stand up, please?" An older Hispanic woman in the back row stood up nervously. She was wearing her church dress and looked completely out of place among all the wealthy guests. "Mrs. Rodriguez was charged $320 for brake work that was never done," Danny announced. "She's a single mother who works 2 jobs, and she went without groceries for a week to pay that bill." The room was dead silent now. Everyone was staring at Mrs. Rodriguez, then at Kevin, then back at Danny. "Mr. Chen, could you join us as well?" Mr. Chen stood up along with Mrs. Johnson and several other customers Danny had contacted. One by one, Danny read their names and explained how Kevin had cheated them. The total amount kept climbing, and with each story the guests looked more shocked. "This is insane," Ashley said. But she was looking at Kevin with doubt in her eyes now. Kevin, tell them this isn't true. Kevin's face was red and sweaty. It's all a misunderstanding. Danny's confused about some paperwork, that's all. Danny smiled and pulled out Kevin's notebook, the one with the detailed plans to frame Danny for the thefts. Is this your handwriting, Kevin? He opened to the page where Kevin had written, Danny's desperate for money, good motive, and plant evidence in Danny's toolbox. Danny read the entire plan out loud, including Kevin's notes about how to make Danny look guilty. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. People started talking all at once, their voices getting louder and more upset. Mr. Patterson was staring at Kevin like he'd never seen him before. You were going to frame Danny? Ashley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not what that is, Kevin said desperately. You're taking it out of context. Danny pulled out his phone and played one of the recorded conversations with Mrs. Johnson, where she described how Kevin had scared her into paying for tires she didn't need. Then he showed the receipts for Kevin and Ashley's expensive purchases, all made with stolen money. By now, Ashley was crying. Not tears of joy, but tears of humiliation and shock. She was starting to realize that everything they'd built together was based on lies. The house we put a deposit on, she said slowly, my engagement ring, the wedding dress, all paid for with money stolen from hardworking people like Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Chen, Danny confirmed. That's when Detective Williams stepped forward and showed his badge. Kevin Morrison, you're under arrest for wire fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The room exploded. Guests were talking loudly. Some were standing up to get a better look, and Ashley was sobbing into her hands. Kevin tried to run, but the other officers were ready for him. They handcuffed him right there at the altar, still wearing his tuxedo. This is all a mistake, Kevin kept saying as they led him away. Danny's lying. He's jealous. He's the one who's been stealing. But nobody believed him anymore. The evidence was too clear, too detailed, too overwhelming. As Kevin was being arrested, Danny turned to address the crowd one more time. 3 weeks ago, you all made me feel like I was nothing because I don't have money or fancy clothes. You treated me like I was beneath you, like I didn't deserve to be in the same room. But while you were judging me for being poor, you were celebrating a thief. You were toasting someone who was stealing from elderly people and single mothers. The room was completely silent now. Mr. Patterson was staring at the floor. Ashley's mother looked like she wanted to disappear. The difference between Kevin and me isn't money or social status, Danny continued. It's character. I work honestly for every dollar I earn. Kevin steals from people who can't afford to lose a single penny. Yet you treated him like a prince and me like a servant. Danny closed his folder and walked toward the exit, but before he left, he turned back one more time. Oh, and Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chen, Mrs. Johnson, Peterson's auto shop will be refunding every penny Kevin stole from you, plus interest for your trouble. Kevin might have stolen your money, but he didn't steal your dignity. You all have more class than anyone in this room. 6 months later, Danny was running his own auto shop with Peterson as his business partner. Kevin was serving 3 years in prison, and Ashley had moved back in with her parents after losing the house. Danny never forgot the lesson he learned that night. Sometimes the people who look down on you the most are the ones with the most to hide, and sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have.